First time in Budapest, and when I told people where I was going, they're like, because I was just in London, and they asked me, so where are you going after this? Are you going home? I was like, no, I'm going to go to Budapest. And there were two things that they said. The first was, ooh, you're going to love it there. And the second thing is they always made sure that they pronounced Budapest, so that I would know that they knew the right way to pronounce it. So that's the effect you have on other people, folks. Congratulations.
Okay, I would start with some warm-up questions.
Okay.
Simple ones, but just to have a grip on you, what kind of person are you first?
Sure.
Burgers or pizzas?
Burgers or pizzas, this isn't even a question. It's absolutely pizza. One, because I'm Italian, and then second of all, because it's a complete food, right? You've got your bread, you got your meat, you got your dairy, you got your vegetables. It's all there for you. I guess a cheeseburger would be the same thing, but even so. So I'm very, very much that sort of thing. If you want to start a fight, you could ask what kind of pizza, because I went to school in Chicago, and there's the Chicago-style pizza, which is very, very thick. And the New York people hate it, right? Because they have a very, very thin style of pizza. And so they fight over that. Just sort of like you were talking about the fish soup last night, right? Like, what type of soup?
Szeged and Baja style.
Yeah, exactly. Same sort of thing.
We should check it next time. Okay, it was just it's supposed to be a short question.
Okay.
Just a warm-up.
This is what you get.
Okay. I know the answer, but I have to raise this question because maybe not everybody knows.
Okay.
PC or console?
PC or console. I play video games, but I mostly play them on the PC. Right? Because I'm already sitting in front of the PC because I'm writing a novel. So I just switch over and then play from there. My daughter plays mostly on consoles. So although we both remember the Wii, the Nintendo Wii, we both played that for a while, but very much of a PC person.
PC, so PC Master Race.
PC Master Race.
Okay. Yeah. Now, getting a bit political. Star Wars or Star Trek?
What are you doing to me? So, mostly Star Trek, but here's the thing. Who among us does not want a lightsaber, right? Even as an adult, you're just kind of like...
It's a good question. So
it's really cool.
Anybody in the room who doesn't want a lightsaber, raise the hand.
Who doesn't want a lightsaber? What's wrong with you, sir?
Minority. We won.
Leave now. But I like the ethos of the Star Trek universe more. It's more consistent. It's better. But Star Wars has the better toys. Right? It's got the lightsaber, it's got the droids, it's got the speeder bikes that were in Return of the Jedi, and they've just got all the cool stuff. So if I could live in the Federation but still have a TIE fighter, then we would be fine. But here's the thing about the lightsaber. Everybody wants a lightsaber. None of us should have a lightsaber, because we would all be amputees in like 15 minutes or under, right? Be like, well, this is so cool. Flunk. There goes an arm. It would be great for our doctors if they would make them a lot of money, but all of us would be in deep, deep trouble. So we should not have lightsabers, but we all want them.
Okay, but you told us that TIE fighters are better than X-Wings.
I didn't say that. I said that I would want a TIE fighter. I'm not saying they're cooler than X-Wings, but everybody goes for the X-Wing. Because, for the same reason, because they're the good guys. I'll tell you my favorite of those actually is the A-Wing fighter. There's something about it that just looks like a really cool convertible. So that would be the one that I would want. The X-Wing is fine. The X-Wing's fine if you want to do that, but A-Wing would be for me.
Thanks. You mentioned that a friend of yours told you how to pronounce properly Budapest.
Budapest, yes.
And I'm quite curious that what is the most exotic language your works were translated into?
The most what?
Exotic language.
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, no language is exotic to the people who know them, but I think probably for me it would be Thai, because, I mean, first there are the languages that have the same alphabet as English, which at least you can look at them and go, yes, those are words. And then you get the like Cyrillic, which we're used to seeing even if you don't actually read Cyrillic, but you know basically where that's from. And then same with Chinese and Japanese, which at least you can look at them and go, yes, I understand this. But for Thai, the Thai script is, I can't make sense of it at all, and I don't feel like, you know, and again, it's only exotic to me because I don't read it and have no context for it, but I just look at it, I'm like, I have been published in squiggle, right? It's just all these little things. So, but I'm super excited every time that I'm published in a new language, because so he's one of my translators, right? And I'm always super excited because somebody else has gone through the process of taking what I wrote and having it make sense in an entirely different language. And essentially, I have to trust you that you didn't screw it up.
Try to.
Right, and because I don't know. The only time that I can do that is I took German, the German language for 7 years, so I can kind of read my German translation, and it's fine, but it is one of those things, but that's the only one. The rest of them I'm just like, duh. You could be saying something completely different and I wouldn't know.
No, we don't do that.
Okay.
I
mean, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I'm sure your translation is fine.
Do you have any idea how many copies are sold worldwide from your works?
The latest number that we have of all the books is probably like 5 million or something like that, which is a fair number. I'm pretty happy with it, you know. Thank you. All of you, I appreciate it. But it's hard to say. You know, it's a moving target in the sense of the new book comes out and you get the initial people who are going to buy the thing. But it's not only, you know, some of them are in hardcover, some of them are in translation, some of them are in audiobook. Audiobook is a very big market for me now. But they all report differently. The only person who really has a good idea of how many books I sell is my agent, because all the reports come to him eventually, because all the money goes to him eventually. But those reports are also anywhere from 1 month to 2 years late, depending on how quickly the publishers from other countries report. So at any one time, we have an approximation, but we don't have a really good idea.
5 million is still a quite impressive number.
I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's not Harry Potter numbers.
Speaking of Harry Potter, I missed the praising part of my speech that you did something very similar what J.K. Rowling achieved with the Harry Potter books, because what you achieved is to bring some new readers to a genre which was before that not that popular. I mean, military science fiction was great when Heinlein did it half a century ago.
Sure.
And it was kind of a surprise for me that even the hardest part of your military science fiction is praised by young ladies. So I guess they before that didn't read that type of text, and now it's quite popular. So it's a very similar achievement that J.K. Rowling did.
I will take the compliment. Thank you. Let me just text Joe. I do think it's true. I mean, one of the things that I'm very passionate about as a writer, and a writer of science fiction, is that science fiction isn't just for one type of person. That anybody can read science fiction, anybody can enjoy science fiction, and that part of my job as a writer, literally part of what my job as a writer, you know, if you talk to my American publisher, is to write the sort of science fiction you can give to someone who doesn't read it and say, this is a good place to start. Gateway science fiction. That's what I do. And I don't want, as a writer, to try at the very outset to exclude anyone. I want it to be accessible to anybody who wants to pick up the book. I don't want it to be an inside joke, right, where it's just only for the people over here. No, I want everyone to read it. So when I write stuff, this is how I explain it. So I'm married, and I have a mother-in-law. And my mother-in-law does not read science fiction. She reads romance, she reads other stuff, she doesn't read science fiction. But she's gonna read my books because I'm her son-in-law and she loves me. So when I'm writing, I want to write it so that Dora, my mother-in-law, can read it and can enjoy it. So when I'm writing stuff in science fiction, I'm like, how do I write this so that she will get into it, that she will enjoy it? It's basically the Dora standard. And if Dora can read it and like it and enjoy it, then I guarantee you anybody can, because like I said, she doesn't read science fiction. So I don't write to Dora. It's not, but I always write with her in mind. And it's the same sort of thing. You write for the people, you write in mind the people who you can reach, who you might not otherwise. By the way, her favorite book is The Ghost Brigades, which I know that you translated. So she hasn't read your version, I'm sorry, but the point of it is that she does read the books and she does enjoy the books, and in doing so and making it accessible to her, and make it accessible to a lot of other people. And sure, and I think that, yeah, in this particular case, the comparison to J.K. Rowling is apt in the sense of so many people were not reading fantasy, and so many people initially thought those books were just for kids, and yet they became this thing that drew in so many people. Now, to be fair, like I said, I'm here, and she's up here in terms of influence, and she's probably, and I will argue this with anyone, J.K. Rowling is probably the most important writer of the last at least 25 years, maybe even the last half century, in terms of bringing readers to reading, and we should all respect that. But on a smaller scale, I can absolutely agree that that is something that I want to do and am happy to do.
Speaking of family ties, I have to ask the status and the background behind Zoe's tale.
Okay.
Because I also translated that one, which is quite a different type of text compared to Ghost Brigades. But I sense that you had somebody in mind when you wrote the Zoe's tale.
So Zoe's Tale is the fourth book in the Old Men's War series. Takes place in the same time frame as The Last Colony, and is told from a point of view of a 16-year-old girl. And it was the hardest book that I've ever had to write, because I don't know if you know this looking at me, I have never been a 16-year-old girl. And I didn't know how to write a 16-year-old girl. And so I tried it, and I wrote it. I wrote a first chapter, and my friend, who is also a writer, Mary Robinette Cole, who is up for the Hugo this year, said I would like to read this, because I want to see how, what your version of a 16-year-old girl looks like. And so I sent it to her, and she was like, no. No. And I'm like, what do you know, Mary Robinette Cole? Hugo winner. So I gave it to my wife, Christine, to read as well. And she comes back and she says, not only is Mary Robinette right, she was being nice to you. And so I had to start that journey of trying to figure out what it was like to write a 16-year-old girl. And I have to say, my male friends, my guy friends, were really unhelpful because they were like, just hang around with 16-year-old girls. And I'm like, what are you saying? Like, I was 38 at the time. That wouldn't have been really great, just hanging out in the mall, like listening in to, that's where I would have been arrested, and rightly so. So I didn't know, and also I didn't know any 16-year-old girls, but I did know women who had been 16-year-old girls. And so I did this really crazy thing, which was I listened to them.
Really surprising.
I know, right? And then I just started working on it again. And poor Chrissy, my wife, had to read all the variations of this chapter that I was trying to get this tone right. And it would be like, no, 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 oh hell no, no. And then finally she's like, yes, this is right, this is it, and this is what you should write. And then I had that locked in, and I was able to get that voice. And anytime I tried to veer away from that voice, I just wouldn't be able to write. So it was excruciating getting to that point where I could do that. What makes me happy is that later on it was nominated for the Hugo Award. It wasn't going to win that year because I was up against Neil Stevenson and Neil Gaiman and Charlie Strauss and Cory Doctorow. But I was so happy because for me it was affirmation that I had gotten that voice correct. So that was the most difficult thing that I'd ever had to write. But one of the things that I was thinking about when I was writing this 16-year-old girl was my daughter was 8 at the time, my daughter Athena. And part of the way that I imagined Zoe was I tried to imagine what my child would be like as a 16-year-old girl. What her attitude would be, what she would say, how she would say it, all of those sorts of things. And so even though she wasn't the direct model, I was imagining what my daughter would be like when she got to that age. And I have to say, my daughter eventually turned 16, and I nailed it. Because she was, and is, because she's 20 now, literally the most sarcastic human I know, aside from me, and I am delighted. I just love who my daughter has become. So as far as that goes, it was a very important book for me, and it's dedicated to my daughter. My daughter finally did read it, back I think when I was on a book tour, and she read it when I was on book tour so that I wouldn't be around while she was reading because she didn't want me to know. And then I come back, she's like, I read it, it was beautiful, I loved it so much. And how could you do that to Enzo, who, if you've read the book, I've got someone right here going, yes, that is what, how could you do that? If you haven't read the book, don't get attached to Enzo. But in any event, yes, that's where that is.
Seems that you usually do your homework when you prepare yourself for the books, and that's what brings me in the Old Man's Fur universe at the first place. When I read it, I thought that you nailed lots of aspects of military,
sure.
IT, psychology, and later teenage girls. So
it sounds bad when you put it that way, but yes.
So when do you get all the inspiration and the background data for those topics? Because it's not that publicly available, all of them, but you nailed it.
Well,
start with the military.
Yeah, starting with the military. When you're writing military science fiction, there's kind of two ways you can go. And some of it is you look at the military science fiction that has come before, but there's a danger to that. Because if you're going on fictional versions of what the military is, then your approximation of what the military is going to be that much more removed from the reality of it. But as it turns out, my brother was in the military. He was an Army Ranger. My father was in the military. My father-in-law was in the military. He was in the Navy. We have cousins in the Navy. We have a lot of family who is in the military. In the United States, it's quite some, because we have a very large military. Quite a few people go through it at one point or another. So friends, family, and basically you have to be open to, as a writer generally, listening to people, listening to their experiences, listening to their lives, so that you can get, perspectives that you wouldn't have yourself because you can only live your single individual life. But also because the more people you know, and the more you open yourself up to listening to other types of people, the better your approximation of the world is, either in the contemporary world or building the world moving forward. So I had a lot of background in terms of just people that I knew who had lived in the military and had told me about their lives in the military, and incorporated that. Of course, I also did a lot of research in both warfare generally and the day-to-day life of being in the military, particularly in the United States, which is where I live. So you put that all together. You do some research, you do some experience from your own life experience, and then you extrapolate. You take the next step, but you do it responsibly. The military that I have in the Old Men's War series is not the military that exists today. It's not the military that exists in the past. It is, we try to imagine what that military would be like, in the future, based on what we already know, and then tweak from there. And that's basically what you do with science fiction. You, in general, whether you're doing it with the science of science fiction or whatever, you get what we already know as correct as you can, and then you speculate from there. Because if you get all the little things that we already know today right, when you ask people to make that big step into speculation, they're willing to do it because you got the little things right up front.
And also, interesting question for me that at some point of your life you were living in a big city as a journalist. And what makes a big city journalist to a terrific writer in a small town in rural Ohio?
Oh, okay. Wow. So let me recast this. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in Los Angeles. And then I went to school in Chicago, and that's where I started doing journalism. I got a job as a movie critic. So the first job I had after college was watching movies for a living, and which is really hard for me. And I did that in California again, another big city. And then I moved to Washington, D.C. area, because after I worked as a journalist, I worked for America Online. This is 20 years ago. And then now I live in this tiny little village in Ohio. It's got about the same population as this room. And it has Amish, the guys who wear the big hats and you go with the little buggies. Traffic jam in our town is 3 cars behind an Amish buggy. It really does happen. And people always want to know, they're like, how did you get from the big city to this little tiny place in Ohio? And the answer is usually, when I answer this, I usually just, and I can't do it as well here because it won't, you can't see it, but I always hold up a picture of my wife, and I'm like, this is why I live in a tiny little town in Ohio. Because when our daughter was born, she wanted to move closer to her family who lived in Ohio. And they lived in rural Ohio. And I was like, no. Why? Because having grown up in California and living in big cities and all that sort of stuff, the idea of living out in the middle of nowhere was kind of terrifying to me. So for the first 2 years of my daughter's life, Chrissy and Athena, my daughter, would go and visit family about once a month, and then they would come home. But eventually she was like, you are a writer. You can work from anywhere, so I want to move to Ohio. And I thought of this plan. You see, in California, in Southern California and in Washington, D.C., it's very expensive to live there, right? So I said, I want 5 acres of land. Because 5 acres of land in California is basically like $20 million, right? And I was like, there's no possible way that we can do that. But if you live out in the middle of nowhere, land is super, super cheap. And I just didn't figure that. And so she calls me, she's visiting Ohio, and she says, I've found a place. It is exactly 5 acres of land. And it was. It's 5.001 acres of land. And it's a square, and it's a rectangle, and it's the shape of a New York City block, exact dimensions. And I go out there, and I'm like, you win, you know? Because she did everything that I asked her to do, even though the whole intent was to be like, avoid it. So we moved out there, and we've lived there now for 18 years, and I have to tell you now that I absolutely love it. Because I travel so much now. I mean, I was in London last week. I'm here now. I'm going to be in Los Angeles and Denver at the end of this next month, and then I'm going to be in Washington, D.C., and then I'm going to be in Spain, and then I'm going to be in Dublin, and then I'm just traveling so much that when I come home, after seeing all you wonderful people, I want to see no one. Because I am an introvert. I know it's hard to believe right now, but eventually I get to the point where after I've seen everybody and I'm like, hi, it's so great to see you, all this sort of stuff, and eventually I get to the point, and now I am going to set you all on fire because I can't deal with you anymore. And so I go home, and literally, you know, just there's nobody within like 300 meters of me, and I'm just like, so now I love it. It's just the weirdest thing.
Introvert, you said?
Introvert.
With such an enormous footprint in social media?
Well, I mean, social media, you do it from your room, right? You're not like, you know, it's not like I'm not tweeting live. I mean, except for just now when I tweeted the picture of all of you. But normally, I mean, social media is for introverts because you don't actually have to, like, you know, be with this person right there. I'm sure you're lovely, but you know what I'm saying. You know, it's like I don't have to spend the psychic cost of actually like having a conversation with you and taking your interests into heart. I mean, and all that sort of stuff. So it's actually meant for people who can't actually socialize with other humans. I mean, extroverts use it too, I guess, but it's for introverts. But no, I mean, and I think there's nothing wrong with being an introvert as a writer because you have to be in a room. You have to sit there for hours and hours with just yourself for company. So you better be willing and able to spend time on your own. But being on social media does not mean you're an introvert. It just means, or not that you're not an introvert. It just means that you know how to communicate in that particular medium.
It's a good point because being as active on social media as you are, sure. From time to time you must face some, let's say, unpleasant communication, trolls, and so on. Even some scandals like the Puppygate. Was it in time?
Yeah.
How do you handle those?
Well, so I've been online for like 25, 26 years, right? I first got on the internet in 1993, 94, and Chrissy will remember this because I came home with a brand new Macintosh and a modem. And this was like literally when the World Wide Web had just been invented. And she and I were living together, and she went home to visit her family that weekend. And as she was leaving, I had set up the computer, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to check out the internet, because it's a hot new thing that all the kids are doing." And she says, "Okay." And she leaves, and 72 hours later, she comes back, and I'm in the same spot. And I haven't moved. And she says, "What have you been doing?" I said, "I've seen the whole internet now." Because you could still do it you could still see the whole internet back in 1993. So I've been online for all this time, and I've been getting into arguments and having discussions and doing all that sort of stuff for all that time. And so for me, part of it is just habit, so I'm used to it. But the other thing is that you can't be online for that long and not understand what the dynamic is. That there are going to be some people that you will meet who are going to be genuinely lovely people, and you'll have some of the best conversations of your lives online because you have the time and space to talk about it. There are going to be people who troll, and the trolls have been there since the very early days of the Usenet, where the only thing they ever had to contribute to the argument was being rude or saying the most terrible thing that they could. So you learned how to deal with that. So over time, it's just I got used to the patterns of it, and I understood it. The other thing is that all times when I'm on the internet, and this is there's kind of a weird way to put it, but I've always been sort of at the top of the internet. You know, I'm a straight white dude who is reasonably well off. So there's very little that happens on the internet that is going to negatively affect me. Essentially, people are either punching up or punching across. So it's a very different dynamic for me, and has been, especially now that I've become quote unquote well known, and as a famous writer. Which famous writers, here's actual fame, here's where you are as a famous writer, but it's still above where everyone else is, and so in that sort of stuff, a lot of the dynamic of tearing people down as the person who I am just simply doesn't work. And not only that, but I was a journalist for years and years and years, so I got used to getting hate mail. And I was a critic, so I know how to say mean things. So I understand how this whole dynamic works. And so when people would send me hate mail, I would send the hate mail back with corrections. People were like, "You suck, you're the worst, I hate you." And I'm like, "Really? You've spent all this time to send me an email, and this is the best you can do? Couldn't you have put a little more effort into this hate mail? If you really hate me, then you should be able to spend a little time to make it memorable," and you would send it back. And the response would just be, they would either just "No, you really suck now." I'm like, or they would "All right, fine. You are the lowest form of paramecium that ever reached out from the slime." And you're like, "See, don't you feel better now? You have made some effort, and we're all better for it." And those are the people that you could actually eventually have a conversation with, because they got what it was that you were doing. And I still do that to some extent. Now on Twitter, I do a lot of muting and blocking now, simply because I don't have time anymore. Apparently I have a job. A lot of times someone will be, say something really awful, and I will just do this thing where I put in parentheses a pet head, "I'm sure you thought that was devastating." And then I just mute them, and then they're and that's the end of them. But that's kind of the way that I always deal with it. Now, I know that I'm running long on this answer, but again, I'm me. So now there have been times where there have been people who have decided to make me their hobby. During this thing a couple years ago, or about 5 years ago now, in science fiction, called the Sad Puppy Affair, where some right-wing writers and agitators decided to try to disrupt the Hugo Awards. One of their primary targets, not the only one, but one of them, was me, because I represented apparently everything that they disliked about science fiction as it existed today, which made no sense given that what I was writing was exactly pretty much what they were writing, only I didn't have their politics, but never mind that. But they literally we're going to go after you on a daily basis for as long as we can. And part of that is, part of my way of dealing with that was to use some of this as an object example to discuss the things that they were talking about and explain why it is. Part of it was to be what we would call in video games a tank, that you are the person drawing fire so that other people who are more vulnerable do not take fire. But part of it was also using that as a way to do some good. There's a particular fellow, a guy named Theodore Beale, who just prior to the Sad Puppy stuff, just decided that he was going to attack me on a nearly daily basis. And Theodore Beale, in my opinion, is racist, sexist, homophobic, and just a general terrible person. So I said, all right, every time he mentions me, because he was making me something to rally his troops behind, I will put $1 in the pot for charities and organizations that represent the people he hates, for people who are gays and lesbians, for people who are trans, for women, for minorities. And when I started doing that, other people said, this is a great idea, can we get in on it too? And so that is how we raised somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000 for these various groups, because he couldn't stop talking about me. And so I was like, okay, if you're gonna talk about me, I'm gonna do some good with this. And that's sort of the thing that you have to do. You have to do all combinations of these sorts of things. Some people you can ignore, some people you can engage, some people you make object examples out of, and some people you take their hate and you turn it around and you make something as good as you can from it. And that's basically how I've survived online for 25 years.
That's some story.
Thank you.
And do you need that skills again? Because as far as I know, this year's Hugo nominees on the best novel categories, 5 ladies against 1 guy. Nora Jemisin won 3 Hugos in a row, being female, colored. So I think that presents some kind of a challenge in a white male universe.
Well, I mean, speaking as a straight white male who writes science fiction, so let's take this year, for example. The nominees this year, there are 6 finalists for the Hugo Award. 5 of them are women. 1 is a non-binary, is a trans male, Yoon Ha Lee. And that's all very interesting, right? That's kind of cool. But the thing that I always say to people is, let's look at the individual books that are nominated. One is The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal, who is a multiple Hugo Award winner before. Her books have always been very good. This one is a great alternate history, talking about what it would be like if the American space race was actually an international space consortium, and women had been part of the astronaut program from the beginning. It's a superb book. It's been getting excellent reviews. It's been optioned for television, and it's just a great book. Another one is Space Opera, which I blurbed by Catherine Valente. She's also been nominated before. Hilarious book. One of the funniest science fiction books I've ever read. Yoon Ha Lee, this is the 3rd year in a row that they have been nominated for their series. Great space opera, things are wonderful. Spinning Silver, Naomi Novik, who has won a Nebula before, has been nominated for the Hugo before for Uproot, and was a Campbell Award winner. Rebecca Roanhorse, who won the Campbell Award for Best New Writer last year and a Hugo, one of the very few people, I think maybe only the 2nd person, to win both a Hugo and the Campbell Award in the same year. I couldn't do it. I just won the Campbell Award when I was nominated for both. Over and over in each of these cases, we are seeing that the writers and the books are amply qualified, are just tremendous writers, and the books are really good. And so the fact that they all happen to be not straight white men, is, in my opinion, coincidence, because we're looking at the work and we're looking at what's actually being on the table for us to consider. There's not a book that is nominated this year that would not, in any particular year, not be Hugo worthy. That it happens this year that it's not, that it's all not men is fine. In 2009, I was nominated for the Hugo Award, and everybody then was nominated. That was nominated was a straight white male. It was the two Neils, Gaiman and Stevenson, Charlie Strauss, Cory Doctorow, and me. Did all of our books deserve to be on that ballot? Absolutely. Did we happen to be straight white men? Sure. Now, the thing that is also the case is when this puppy thing happened, the sad and rabid puppies happened, not only did a number of people come in from that way, basically to troll the awards and to denigrate it, but also a number of people came in from other places as well to support the awards and to become part of it. When the people who decided to that they were trying to troll the awards didn't get what they wanted, because none of these things ever won, and all of them ended up below no award, which is a thing that you can say. If you don't want an award being given this year because you don't think the things are qualified, no award is an option. And so all their stuff usually ended up below no award. And eventually they got tired of it because they weren't getting their way, and they went away. But the other people who came in and said, no, we want to participate, no, this is an award, and no, we want to talk about what is good in the field of science fiction, they stayed. And so as a result, we have a more diverse group of people who is reading and nominating. And so we are seeing science fiction and fantasy, all of which is absolutely worthy, but otherwise, and maybe before wouldn't have been recognized by the voting population of the Hugos. I cannot complain as a reader or as a writer that there is more good stuff being considered and being nominated. I am unconcerned as someone who's up for awards that the competition has now gotten tougher. Because if I don't think my material, the stuff I write, can compete against any writer, then I shouldn't be competing at all. I don't need to limit myself to just competing against other straight white men who are writing just the stuff that I would write. I want to be competing against the people who don't write what I write. I finished second place last year in the Hugo Awards for Best Novel to Nora Jemisin, who won 3 times in a row. I have never been happier to be second place, because that book and that series absolutely deserved every accolade that it has gotten over the course of the years. It's a game changer in science fiction and fantasy. If I had won last year, I would have taken the award, thank you, but I would have said, basically, you're all high, you know, it should have gone to Nora. But I don't have a problem competing against Nora. Nora's working up here. I'm right on her heels. She's making me better. I hope I'm making her better too. I am not afraid to compete with anyone for any award, and anybody who is or complains that other people are there because they are social justice warriors, or just because they're a woman, or just because they are admitting they can't compete. They are admitting that they are cowards, and to hell with them. So, I'm sorry. That's
I think it's completely plausible. Speaking of your future works, competition against anybody who will be present on a Hugo, there are another factor which is also on the table. You are forced to deliver because you are in a 10-year-long contract.
Yes, I'm going to be around for a while, aren't I?
So we can be sure that we will see some Joe Scalzi books coming up in the next couple of years.
Yes.
Because you're obliged to do.
Yes.
This was a kind of a new business model for the entire industry. Is there any other example on that? And what do you think can be?
Actually, there is at least one other example that I can think of, which is Victoria Schwab. who writes as V. Schwab and also Victoria Schwab. She signed a long-term deal with Tor as well. And I think it's a shorter book deal, but it is still a very significant book deal, both in number of books and length of time and money. So for those of you who don't know, because I don't know how much of you know about the trivia of my life, in 2015, I signed a book deal with Tor Books in the United States. It's 13 books over 10 years and $3.4 million. So, and so it was a big deal in the United States because it was just such a long book deal. Most book deals are 1 book or 2 books or sometimes 3 books, but this was 13 books. And it was some books that were in a series, some books that will be new, but it's just a very, very long deal. And usually, like I said, we usually don't get those. And I didn't expect it. I went in and I over-prepared because I wanted to get a longer book deal from Tor. And so I brought in 13 book ideas, and I thought they would take like 4 or 5, right? And they're like, no, we'll take them all. And I was like, okay. Because all of a sudden it went from, and here we are, and now you know what you're doing for the next decade. And one side effect of that, I should actually say, is so I have this ring, and it's a Tor ring. It's the ring of my publisher from in the United States. And the thing is they don't give these to writers, they give them to employees, right? Because after you've been there for a certain amount of time, you get a ring. But you don't give them to writers because we would go from publisher to publisher. But an editor came up to me and they said, you know, you're gonna be around for a while. Do you want the ring? And I'm like, yes. And my wife laughs every time she sees that. She says, you only wear 2 pieces of jewelry. You have your wedding ring, and you have your wedding ring. And so when Victoria Schwab, who also has this very long deal, also with Tor, she made it a condition of her deal that she also got a ring. And so now we've established basically it has to be a multi-year, multi-book, multi-million-dollar contract. And so then she got the ring and she was like worried that I would be upset, like that I would be like the Highlander, there can be only one, you know? And so she sent me a picture of it and she's like, just so you know, I have one of these now. And my response was, this is so cool. So every time we see each other, we click them together like the Wonder Twins. And just be like, so this is what we do. Of course, nobody else can have them now. We both have them, and that's it. But it's great having this contract. And people are like, do you feel like pressure about this contract? And the answer is no, because I was already writing a book a year anyway, so this is very similar schedule to that. But the other thing about it is, the hardest thing about being a writer is not the writing, it's the uncertainty. Right? You never know if you are going to be able to sell the next novel. You never know how much money you're going to get for the next novel. You never know, will the publisher be in business before my novel is out? All of these uncertainties, and every single time you do a book, you have all of these uncertainties. And now for a decade, at least, I don't have those uncertainties. All I have to do is write my book. And I have to write them. If I don't write them, then I don't get paid, and then my cats eat me, you know. But as long as I write the books, then everything else is taken care of. I'm still involved in everything, but but the uncertainty isn't there. And like I said, for a writer, especially these days, that sort of, to have that sort of security and not to worry about, will there be an audience for the book? Will we be able to find this stuff? Is immensely relieving. All I have to do is write my books. And that's great.
I think it's a bit more than that. You have to write good books.
You know, I could name any number of writers who have written terrible books and have sold millions and millions of copies more than I have. But I won't, because that would be awful. And I'm not that sort of person in public. But it is, you don't have to write a good book. You have to write a competent book. It has to have sentences and paragraphs and things that make sense. And then competent is like objective, like this is grammatical, right? Good is a value judgment. Like, I can tell you that there is not anybody who likes every single thing that I've written. Even people who really like what I write. He's nodding, that's true, I hate this one thing. What is it that you don't like?
I wasn't too hot about the head-on book.
He wasn't hot about the head-on book, right? And that's fine, you know. You can leave now, but it's fine. But the whole point is that no matter what you do, there's always going to be one book that just doesn't work for someone, or two books or something like that. I think about all my favorite artists and writers and movie makers, and they all have at least one thing that I don't like. That not only do I not like, I'm just like, why? Why did you do this? You're so much better than this. But as it turns out, no matter that, whatever book it is of mine that you don't like, it will be different than somebody else, right? Well, I mean, there's only 14 books, so there'll be groupings, but there's always a book that somebody doesn't like, and it's usually a different book. And that's fine. You can't hit it out of the park all the time. Not everybody's going to think everything is good. Yeah, I try to write competent books that are of a specific level of quality, and then it's up to the reader whether they like them or not.
And because of this uncertainty thing, that's why you targeted different threads in your books. I mean, you have the Old Man's War series, you have the Head or Logged In series.
Sure.
Can we expect some more, or you will elaborate those existing threads?
Well, I mean, so yeah, you have the Old Man War series, you have the Interdependency series, which is Collapsing Empire, you have the Lock-In series, you have Dispatcher, which is the audio, and then eventually gets into print. And then I also have standalones. When I write things to begin with, almost all of them are standalone. I don't know if they're going to be successful or not. So I just wait to see if anybody likes them enough that I write another one in the series. But the reason I do that is for two reasons. One, because I am easily bored, right? And so I don't want to just be writing the same things over and over and over again, even if I like the series. Very early on in my time at Tor Books, my editor said, you know, you could just write every other book being an Old Man's War book, and then whatever you wanted for the other books, and that would be fine. And on one sense, that sounds like really cool, and on the other hand, it sounds like a real grind, that you would just be doing the same universe and the same characters over and over. But the other thing is, science fiction and fantasy writers always have this fear, and it's a high-class fear. It's the first world problem fear, which is, do readers like me for me as a writer, or do they like me for my series, right? Like if you have a very successful series, like the Old Man's War series, are they only going to read the Old Man's War books and then everything else kind of exists out there? Sure, we'll buy them maybe. Or are they excited about you as a writer and be willing to take a chance on all the sorts of stuff that you write? And like I said, it's a high-class problem. Oh, how horrible for you. You have a series of books that people love so much they only want you to write that series and they give you money for it and so on and so forth. But it is that thing of writers want to do more than one thing. I have felt very fortunate over the course of time that it seems like people are interested in what I write generally. They may not like one thing in particular or one series in particular or whatever, but most of the time they'll be willing to give it a chance. I won my Hugo for Best Novel for Red Shirts. And again, this is a highly obnoxious statement, and I want to make sure you all know this, but I was so relieved that I won it for that and not for the Old Man's War series, because what it meant was, regardless of, it was a standalone, but it meant that people just really liked it enough that this was the one that they decided to give me the award for, as opposed to my famous series that sells and sells and sells and sells. It meant that I had an audience that would follow me regardless of where I went. Now, part of the reason that Tor gives me the stupid long contract is that I'm not going to abandon them. There will be at least one more Old Man's War book. So if you are an Old Man's War fan, it's coming, right? And whether or not
it's an important question for me. When exactly?
All right, so I'm going to tell you some stuff here now that you got to promise you're not going to tell the rest of the world. Do you promise?
No.
You.
Sorry.
I'll tell you what I can tell you, which is that so Old Man's War is in development at Netflix as a movie. Yeah.
That's promising.
And I can say we're at the point where we have a script. I like the script. It seems like most of the folks involved like the script. And so we're at a point where either it will move forward or it won't. And if it, and you never know, right? But if it moves forward, then as soon as I finish the book that I'm writing now, which is the third book in the interdependency series, the next thing I will write is another Old Man's War book, so that when the movie comes on Netflix, we will just happen to have a new book ready, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do. You support, you kind of make sure that if you're not going to support your own book, what are you going to do? If they don't move forward with it, then it will happen sometime. When I get around to it. So it will be either soon or not soon. These are the two options, and we will know very quickly, or at least I will know very quickly which way it's going to be. Please don't be like, hey Scalzi, hey, what's the next book? Because now you all know something. So if I go, oh, the next book's going to be an Old Man's War, and there hasn't been a movie announcement, keep it to yourself. Promise?
Done.
That's just so not. You're so not. Yeah, sure. We'll promise. That's fine. But an Old Man's War book is coming. There'll be another lock-in book. There'll be another book in the interdependency series. But then I'm also going to write a bunch of books that are not related to anything. They're going to be new stuff. And if you guys really like them, then that will probably become a series, and I'll do some of those. And if you like them slightly less, then that will be all that I write in that particular world. And also sometimes I'll just write a book and be like, nope, we're done. Like there will not be a sequel to Red Shirts. Unless...
Red Shirts had 3 codas. That was the trick in it. That it has 3 codas.
Yeah, it's got 3 codas. There won't be a Red Shirt sequel unless Tor says, hi, here's a basket of $5 million. And then there'll be a sequel because I'm weak and I need money. Which reminds me, by the way, that I am fascinated by the florins here. Like I got some. I put money into.
So you have local currency.
I have some florins, with me right now, and there's so many zeros. It makes me feel rich. Like I'm walking around, it's like 10,000 florins. Wow.
You should visit Turkey once.
Well, no. Here's the thing. This is how I tell people that I'm a billionaire right now. Wait. Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, $50 billion. This is a $50 billion bill. And of course it's worth like 16 cents or something like that. But it sure looks impressive, so I'm a billionaire.
Tell us about it. In Hungary we have one of the record high inflation a half century ago, so
okay.
It's quite common here.
Well, I'm sorry for you, but on the other hand, I am a billionaire.
Sure you are. Speaking of other media formats like Netflix, movies, what about video games? Recently we saw some great titles with lots of narrative content like The Witcher, like Horizon Zero Dawn, which had a tremendous amount of narratives in it.
Sure.
What about you in this field?
Well, I've done some work in video games with, there was a studio that called Industrial Toys. It's now part of Electronic Arts, but at the time I was working with them, they were independent. And so we made I wrote the stories for 2 video games that Midnight Star and Midnight Star Renegade. So I participated in that, absolutely. And I'm not opposed to doing more, including licensing Old Man's War or so on and so forth. These days I have a tendency to, what happens is usually if you sell the movie rights, they want to buy all the merchandising rights, which will include video games and stuff like that. These days I have a tendency to keep them unless they are, actually going to move forward and do that sort of stuff. So at the moment, for example, I believe I own the video game rights to Old Man's War. So there could be an Old Man's War video game, or I could help develop another one. The major issue for me in terms of any project at this point is not whether I have the rights or whether I have the interest or what I want to do it, but really do I have the time? I am, like most humans, bound by a 24-hour clock, and about 8 hours of which I have to actually sleep in. And then at some point I do want to spend time with family and pets and friends, and I travel a lot and I do all that sort of stuff. So the amount of time that I have for work is finite. Now, I always have to write the books. I am married to my publisher, and I promised them that I would write those books, so I have to do that. So everything else comes after that. And so it really becomes a point of, do I have enough time to do it? And the answer is no. And the other answer is what I really need to do is I need to build a organization now that I can then offload off to other people to do most of that stuff and then come in and do all that sort of stuff.
Scalzi Incorporated?
Joe Scalzi Incorporated, Scalzi Corp. And the thing is a lot of writers are doing that now. I mean, Patrick Rothfuss has one, Neil Gaiman has one, where you actually have to do that simply to be able to keep up with all the things that people want from you, much less the things that you want to do. And it becomes, again, high-class problem to have, but the limit for me is time and opportunity and people that I trust to do stuff with.
So, speaking of uncertainty, we can be certain that we will have Scalzi books. We can be not so certain that we will have Scalzi movies or series, and even less sure that we will have some video games you will be part of.
Right. I mean, you will always get the books, at least through 2028, right? That's unless I get hit by a bus or eaten by a bear. Or something like, if I die, sorry. I don't know what to tell you, right? But
you have talented family members.
I do. My daughter could probably take up the slack eventually, but at the same time, she doesn't write what I write, so she wants to write different stuff. So ungrateful.
It will be Scalzi anyway, no?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, exactly. As long as it says Scalzi on the title, you'll know it's good. But yeah. So, provided I don't die, you will have books at least through 2028. Okay, that much I can promise. Everything else involves other people, and we don't know how it's going to work out. Old Man's War has been in development for 10 years now. First it was going to be a movie and it was going to be at Paramount Pictures. Then it was going to be a TV series and it was going to be at Sci-Fi. Now it's going to be a movie on TV because it's on Netflix. And in each time, people in Hollywood are all like, we love it. It's brilliant. Everybody thinks it's brilliant. We're so excited about this. We're so happy to work with you. We love you. We love you. And then you don't hear from them for 6 months, right? And then, and then they're like, we're selling it now, and people are very excited. And then they're on there like, it just didn't happen. We don't know what to tell you. If they call you at all, right? And sometimes they don't. And so you have to understand the language there. But it's always dependent on so many other people, because among other things, so if they make an Old Man's War movie, it's going to cost a lot of money, at least $50. No, I mean millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. A 9-figure sum is what they will have to spend in order to make that into a movie. They're not just going to be like, oh, here's $100 million, have fun. If you could make a movie at the end of that, that would be great. there are so many people involved when that sort of money is involved that it's not surprising that things just don't get made.
But Netflix has some track record with you because we just saw the series Love, Death and Robots.
Love, Death and Robots, yes.
3 pieces of you is the ones I can share with my son. So
That's, yes. The Love, Death and Robots is what the people on the internet called it boobs, blood, and death, or, and robots. And they're not wrong. I mean, a lot of it is, there's a lot of nudity, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of gore, all that sort of stuff. And then they have mine, which are generally speaking the funny bits, right? Which is kind of really cool. And that was actually a really good experience. I was working with Tim Miller, who is the guy who directed Deadpool, and then was the real driver on this. And that experience was absolutely great. They showed me the scripts, they took my notes, they sent me like the early versions of the videos and stuff like that so I could see where everything was going on. They took my recommendation to have Maurice LaMarche do the narration for When the Yogurt Took Over. Maurice LaMarche did the voice, at least in English, for Pinky and the Brain. He was the brain. And so to have him narrate something that I wrote just was like, so they do know who I am. And of course, like I said, we're at the point where everybody, including the people at Netflix, seem to be happy with the script. But like I said, between everybody being happy and it actually being made, there's a lot of time yet. We still have to find directors. We still have to find stars. Once we get a director, the director is going to want changes to the script. If we get a big name star, the big name star is going to want changes to the script. It'll go around and around and around and around and around. And, it will be a miracle if it gets made. And if it's good, that will be like the second miracle. Right? So as far as it goes, it's a miracle anything gets made. Even if the worst movie you've ever seen in your life, it's a miracle it got made, right? At all. That it was bad is just a shame. So I'm hoping that Old Man's War movie won't be bad. I don't think it will be bad. Like I said, the script is good. I'm very happy with the script. But there's so many things that can happen, and you just have to accept that you are along for the ride with that as well. I mean, I'm also an executive producer, so at least they have to listen to me. But so much is just going to happen as it happens.
Hard times are coming.
What?
Hard times are coming, that's what I see.
It's just the worst. No, I mean, the thing is that, the worst that can happen is that the movie comes out and then millions of people hear of the book that wouldn't have otherwise heard of the book. And so we sell a lot of books. The end game for me is that's where I'm going to make most of my money is by selling a lot of books, right? It worked for George, right? He's got that series. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's on the HBO Game of something or other. I can't remember. He's sold quite a lot of books off of that. He's got a purple Tesla. So as far as it goes.
Speaking of timing, yesterday you mentioned how much it took to create the last installment. The Consuming Fire. The
Consuming Fire, yes.
Can we share it with the...
Sure. I mean, I've written about it before, so I don't have any problem. So usually, I wrote The Consuming Fire. Actually, the way to do this is a show of hands. Let's see. So I wrote The Consuming Fire in a number of weeks that you can show with your hands. And I want you to put up your hands and guess, how many weeks it took me to write it. So everybody put up your hands. How many weeks do you think it took for me to write The Consuming Fire? Everybody guess. Okay, anybody who has 10 hands, put it down. 9 hands, put it down. Or 9 weeks, put it down. 8 down. 7 down. 6 down. 5 down, 4 down, 3 down, 1, you're just wildly optimistic, so put them down. 2 weeks. I wrote the novel in 2 weeks.
It's still very good, I assure you.
Thank you. Well, I didn't tell anybody that I wrote it in 2 weeks until all the reviews came in, and they were like, "Oh, it's great." and then when it landed on the New York Times bestseller list, then I was like, okay, now I can tell people, right? Between those two things, I was like, now I can
give you
share.
advice, don't try it again.
Don't ever do that. It's a bad idea, and no one should do it ever. Ever. My wife is back there looking at me going, shut up. Because she knows what my deadline for the next book in the series is. It's really soon. But no, what happened was, among other things, the book was originally supposed to actually be coming out right about now in English, right? But it sold, the first book in the series sold very, very well, so they decided to move it up on the schedule. I wish they had told me, because the way that I found out it got moved up from April of this year to October of last year was I went on to Amazon and I saw the pre-sale page. Yeah, and it said coming out October 16th, 2018, and I'm like, oh, I guess I should write that. Because suddenly, all of a sudden, 6 months of my writing time just disappeared. Now, I wish I could blame it all on and there is a small possibility that they told me and I just don't remember, because there's so much that happens that I just don't remember. It's just a haze. But it honestly, and I can't blame it all on my American publisher, because even with the amount of time that got cut off, that 6 months, I still had a number of months that I could do it. But then I went on a book tour, and then I did some other stuff, and then I had some other things to do, and then I played some video games, and then all these sorts of things. And the next thing I know, it was March 1st, and the book was due on March 18th. Or excuse me, March 4th, and the book was due on March 18th, and I say to my wife, okay, here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna shove food underneath the door. You're gonna take the plates away. Once a day, there's gonna be a jug by the side of the door. You're gonna empty that. And she was like, no, you're gonna pee like a normal person, but the rest I will do. And literally just 8,000 words a day for those until it was done. And when it was done, I was too tired to sleep, right? Just was like, and I went downstairs, I'm like, I'm gonna watch some cartoons because that's all I can handle. And 10 minutes later, I turned off the cartoons because it was more than I could handle. And it took a full month, not a full month, but it took a full week before I could actually think like a normal person again. So don't ever do this, and I will never admit if I do it again.
But there is another part of my advice, that don't stop after the first installment, because every second in all of your series, personally, and it's subjective, it's good. So
thank you.
So, and this was again the case against the fact that you did it in 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, I mean, the reason I could do it in 2 weeks was because I had written 14 other novels, so I knew how to do it. Also, all the time that I was not writing the novel, I was thinking about the novel, so it got to a point where I could actually write it and not worry about it too much. That said, never do this. Actually have a schedule. Try to keep to the schedule. Don't do what I've done. This is a very bad idea. Very, very bad idea. Can we open up to questions?
One more question.
Okay.
Before close this one down, what kind of substances you have to use to perform in 2 weeks?
Coke.
Sponsored by Coke.
Literally all I drink. I don't.
Sugar?
I don't. Yeah, there's no sugar in it. It's just caffeine. I don't drink alcohol. I don't take recreational drugs of any sort, except for caffeine. And I don't even drink coffee or tea. I don't really like them. I think they taste terrible. So I know, right? It was like, but it's just the way I've always done things.
How many cats do you need for perform this trick?
What?
How many cats do you need? Because cats are involved in that process.
The cats are involved in the process. I have 4 cats right now, and they're actually a detriment because what you have to do is you have to remove them from your keyboard because they keep like, oh, this is warm, or you know. And I have one cat, my cat. If you follow my Twitter feed, you'll know this. Her favorite place to sit is right here, and so like when I'm trying to type while she's there, it's like.
I ideal pose.
She doesn't care. She's a cat. I mean, I'm her couch. That is my role in life as far as she's concerned. And every once in a while, I'm like, okay, now I really have to get to work. And I take her and I put her on the other couch, and she looks at me like, "You animal, you moved me. You will pay for this."
Okay, and we plan to have the opportunity for you, all of you guys, to raise questions, because I think it's one in a lifetime opportunity to have you here, at least so far.
So far, only once so far. I don't know if we have a microphone to ask people, so in the lieu of an actual microphone, here's what we do. We raise our hands and we'll call on you. Questions to be in the form of a question. Don't do comments. Make it a one-part question if you can. And make them short like a tweet so that we can get as many questions as possible in 15 minutes. So if you have a question, raise your hand. You will start us off, sir. Speak very loudly. How am I going to celebrate my 50th birthday? Sleep, probably, because my 50th birthday is on May 10th, right? And we're getting back on the 30th back to the United States, and I have to be writing a book immediately so when I get home, and I'm leaving again the weekend after. So we're going to stay at home, and we're not going to big blowout, and I'm going to sleep. But Chrissy and I were talking about this, my wife and I. Did we want to do something big? Because 50th is a big thing. But we decided that we're going to do something big next year, which is our 25th wedding anniversary, and that's where we'll throw a big party and do something sort of thing, because that will be for both of us then, as opposed for just me, right? But 50, it's a thing, I'm very excited about it. Next question, right here.
What is your favorite book?
What is my favorite book? Mine or somebody else's? Somebody else's. It's so hard to say. You know what I mean? It's the same when people ask me what my favorite movie is. It's like, you ask me which is my favorite child, which actually is just one because I only have one. The two that I give to people as favorite books, one was from my childhood. It was a thing called The People's Almanac. It was a big, thick book that had a bunch of really short pieces about information about the world. And when I was 6 years old, I thought that all the information in the world was in it. And I read it from cover to cover. And so as a 6-year-old, I knew, random stuff that I don't even know today. Like I could tell you what the capital of Gabon was, when I was 6. And that was really freaky. So that was one of them. And for fiction, there's a book called Winter's Tale by Mark Halperin. And it's nothing like anything that I write, but the writing on individual sentences is so beautiful that I almost don't care what the story was, because each of the sentences was so pretty. And it took me 7 times to read it all the way through, because I would get about halfway through and I'd be like, soon there will be no more of this book left. And then I would put it away and start it again. But it is beautiful. They also made a movie out of it. Read the book. So, next question. Let me over here, and then I will do here, and then here, and then here. So
given the chance at 75, would you join the military and go to space and find
given the chance at 75, would I join the military and go into space, like Old Man's War? When I wrote the book, the answer was no. But now I'm 50. Now I'm 50 and my knees don't work like they used to, and this arm only goes up this far, and I have a little bit of tinnitus in my ears, and none of that is ever going to get any better. I have a pinky that doesn't bend all the way, and so the idea of a new body sounds tempting. The way that I say it to people is I don't know that I would necessarily want to be young again, because they get put into young bodies. But the idea of, what if you could lead a life that you might have led if things had been different, right? And that seems interesting to me. What if I had become a teacher instead of a writer, or a musician instead of a writer, because I used to play drums all the time. And what would my life be like if I had done that? That would be interesting to lead that life. I don't think I would want to go to war because you get a really good chance of being eaten or shot. But to lead a different life, not necessarily young, but just that different life, different people, different experiences. I would like to keep the same wife. I think she's pretty great. But other than that, to switch things around, that would be pretty neat. Your question.
What's your favorite book that you wrote?
What's my favorite book that I wrote? It's probably Zoe's Tale because that was the hardest book to write. I don't know that it's necessarily the best book that I wrote because there are many sorts of books. The easiest book to write was Collapsing Empire because I knew exactly what I wanted to do and it was exactly the book that I intended to write. Almost all the other books between what I was going to write and what I ended up writing were completely different things. But that one was exactly the right one. But other than that, I think probably Zoe's Tale. Don't tell the other books. You know, I want them to all think they're special. You had a question, was it? Yes. What?
Kirk or Picard?
Kirk or Picard?
Kirk or Picard? Probably Picard. But I like the way Kirk talks. You know, he talks like this. And it's compelling in a strange way. Whereas, you know, Picard is, you know, the mellifluous sort of thing. But it's hard for me because I actually think, because, you know, every once in a while when you say Kirk or Picard, there are people like, what's wrong with Cisco? You know, and you're like, fair. You know, Janeway. Janeway had her moments there. And so it's really difficult to say. Probably Picard, but I also have a bias for Next Generation anyway because a friend of mine was on the show, and so I kind of have to vote for him regardless.
Do you consider to write a fantasy like Richard Lincoln?
Do I want to write a fantasy?
Yes.
Yes, I already have. It's the God Engines, it's a God Engines. I don't think it's out in Hungarian. It's super dark, super depressing, and it's not a spoiler to say everybody dies in the end, right? It's all the things that I'm known for, but not that. Like optimistic, happy science fiction that's funny and sarcastic. Not a bit of it. It's and also Dispatcher, which also is not yet in Hungarian, is another one that is fantasy because the central idea of it is that if you murder people, they come back, and it's never explained. It's basically magic, so that makes it fantasy. So I have done fantasy. Now, if you're talking epic fantasy with elves and dwarves and marching off on a quest and stuff like that, I'm probably not going to do that, but if I do, it would be very much more like a story I wrote called Shadow War of the Night Dragons, Book 1, The Dead City Prologue, which is basically spoofing it. That would be more along the lines of what I would do, which is not to denigrate that type of fantasy, because that type of fantasy is awesome. It's just so not what I do that my best way to approach it would be like that. How are we for time? We got to stop? We have to stop. Thank you everybody for coming, and I think he's going to tell you where I'm going to be next and what I'm doing. Okay.
Mindenkit arra szeretnék kérni, hogy legyetek nagyon türelmesek, és rendezetten menjetek ki, mert hatalmas tömeg áll nálunk is a standon, itt is a következő rendezvénynél. Fogunk segíteni a sort felállítani. Aki nem hozott könyvet, hanem majd itt szeretne vásárolni és dedikáltatni, az mindenképpen vegye meg először. Tehát nem a soron belül nem lesz lehetősége vásárolni. Köszönöm szépen, hogy itt voltatok.
Bye-bye. See you later.